This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. So said by Dwight D. Eisenhower on the set of The Real House Husbands of Washington, D.C.
Oh!
How far the mighty have fallen, Marie.
You had such gravitas up to that point.
An alert and knowledgeable citizenry.
Pulitzer!
I think I've seen more.
And then you were all like, yeah.
I have definitely seen more episodes of Real Housewives of New Jersey than I have ever seen of presidential speeches.
Oh my God, I love that so much.
What does that say about America, Marie?
Can we just talk about really fast when she flipped the table?
It's so good. She
was like, you are. Oh my God, Teresa.
I like how they switched. From Judici, which is like the way that most people in like New York or New Jersey would say that last name, to Giudice, to try to sound more Italian. Yes, right, Giudice. What fucking stupid stuff. Goodness me, Marie.
What was her kids' names? Like they were like,
oh my God, there's Melania, and there's
that's right,
there's
Melania.
There's Gina Marie, and there's Ashley Marie, and there's
something else.
Brittany Francesca.
Lords.
I'm trying to think of all the most.
Yeah.
All right. We are, dear listeners,
good.
This episode, we promise, is not about the Real Housewives of New Jersey. It is about the myth, the legend, the all-encompassing conspiracy theory of the military-industrial complex.
Yes.
All right.
Which maybe, that might be how the husbands of the Real Housewives are making their money.
No, it's tax evasion and pizzerias.
We don't know.
That's true.
Well, that could fit in. It's
time for the Mad Scientist Podcast. This week's episode, the military-industrial complex.
So, why don't we start this off by saying kind of, So the military-industrial complex is an idea that really goes, it's pretty prevalent in the modern consciousness, right? It's sort of this, and it kind of means something different for...
We talked about it with Winchester.
We did. We mentioned it in the Winchester Mystery House episode where, remind me, Marie, what was her full name?
Sarah Winchester.
Okay.
Was the widow of the last surviving member of the Winchester rifle fortune.
Right.
And basically, I mean, how in the Civil War and afterwards with Western expansion, the need for weaponry and advanced weaponry is always associated, if not right before or at the same time as war or a major skirmish. And the two are the snake that eats its own tail, whatever that's called, right? It is a chicken and egg. I'm going to keep going with the analogies. It is basically something that doesn't have an end. Like if you get more weapons, you go to war. If you go to war, you're going to need more weapons.
Right. Okay. So the thing you were thinking of was the Ouroboros. But
Ouroboros.
But anyways, yes. So yeah, there is definitely something to the idea of what's known as forever war, right? which is kind of the position that I think a lot of people think the American government took after 9/11 was, and actually why some people believe that 9/11 was perpetrated by the government or allowed to happen, which is in its own right, its own kind of like consecutive cyclical conspiracy theory. But the idea is that like Marie was saying, if the people in power are the ones making money off of war, then why would they ever not have us be inside of a war? Right? Why would they ever have us at peacetime if when they're making the most money is when they're selling bullets and bombs?
Yes.
Now, this conspiracy...
And when is America conceived as most profitable?
Right.
War.
Right. Now, this conspiracy theory goes back initially a lot farther than I think people realize. So this one actually goes back all the way to... this one goes back to actually before even the idea of World War I, right? So the first mention of this idea of war has always had people that profit off of war, right? Wars have always had people who gouge prices and know that war is good for business. I mean, just in terms of simple economics, like if there's a war going on with a country that you trade for, say, milk or wheat or something, then, those objects are going to go up in price in your home country. Right. And so this idea of someone profiteering off of war, has always kind of been around, but it really wasn't until sort of war became mechanized and industrialized that really the sense of a war economy or a kind of like an economic driver that a few powerful individuals would want war and potentially try to cause war. It wasn't until industrialization that really took hold. So the first use of the idea of kind of a war economy was, that idea. So wars were they weren't terrible for economies, but they weren't as good as they are today, right? Back before industrialization.
Yes.
And, but again, the idea of a lot of individuals was that by becoming more globalized and becoming more interconnected with other countries, we would stop war, right? Because economics would not allow war to happen then. Because, why, if the happiness of your population requires, a fruitful trading partnership with China and Russia and Germany and whatever, then you won't go to war because you would never want to stop those partnerships, right? But if anything that has not worked, right? That was kind of the argument given right before World War I for why people thought World War I would never kick off was, well, we have a global economy. It's never going to happen, whatever. That hasn't happened. We've had since, both world wars since that stupid statement was said. And we seem to keep trying to get into them. So it's super good in that sense. But the idea
we're good at finding wars.
We are really good at
creating
wars.
We're
good at finding places to have war in.
Good at that.
So in the Civil War, there was this idea of what was known as the shoddy millionaire, right? And this is kind of where part of, I think, this conspiracy of specific individuals profiting off of war by being unpatriotic or by, working off of the men and women fighting. The shoddy millionaire was a concept of basically people were selling items to the Union Army that were of poor quality. And so you were getting a big order in from the Union Army saying, we need 10,000 shoes, we need 20,000 buttons, coats, whatever. And then when the items were finally being delivered, it was like, shoes made of cardboard and buttons, whatever, buttons of coal or something. I have no idea. Santa Claus or something. So Frosty the Snowman, sorry. Right. And so there was this myth around at the time that there were people who made their money by basically giving the Union soldiers terrible items that were of no use. Right. And since that point, this idea has kind of morphed away from people giving kind of on purpose poor treatment or poor items, and instead morphed into people selling items at such an exorbitant price for what they're worth that they're making so much money off the government being in war. right? So a single warplane, that costs whatever, $200,000 to make, you can sell for $500,000 or $1 billion or whatever, right? Or $1 million, sorry, not $1 billion, $1 million. Like, that's the kind of scope or scale of the con that people think is occurring here, right?
Yes.
So
yes. Besides the natural drive, right? The natural drive to create weaponry, which I think is sort of the seed, right? Like if you are planning on attacking another population, like we were talking about in Civil War and in Winchester, you have to come up with the most proficient way of doing that.
Yeah.
And there's always the next bigger and better weapon or the next bigger and better invention. And that sort of innovation gets geared towards weaponry and gets also geared towards cost.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? Because you are always going to want your troops to have that. And it's also what I think is especially insidious is it is a very palatable, patriotic spend, right? You can sell it very easily by saying, well, we have to have this type of military spending because you want your troops to have the you want, to protect but that's not necessarily always the case of what's the actuality is happening. It's more almost like some propaganda.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's actually almost sort of the feeling of like, as opposed to the shoddy millionaire now, or the shoddy millionaire, now you have the shoddy politician, right? Why don't you want to support the troops with X amount more money? Right.
Yes.
Or, why don't you support the troops? Well, I do, but
the lobbyists.
Right,
yes.
right.
Shoddy lobbyists.
Shoddy lobbyists.
Yes.
So
military. So what is military industrial complex?
Like, what does it actually mean?
You? And what is it? Well, yeah, I think it's like first of all, I was really surprised to learn that it came from Eisenhower. Because when I think of Eisenhower, I think of someone who is very much a
pro-military,
staunch Republican, pro-military war hero. But I think people that are pro-military and that actually have engaged in combat probably are the ones that would be the most against perpetual war.
Yeah. So no, for sure. I mean, yeah, that makes total sense to me, right? I mean, every veteran I've ever met has been, very realistic about their experience and kind of the sacrifice that they make. You know what I mean? And kind of what it means to ask someone else to make that same sacrifice. Like, I don't think anyone leaves. I don't think anyone leaves from the battlefield raring really to go back, right? Some people are damaged irreparably, right, from their time there. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge deal to think about, well, perpetual war for the sake of like 100, 200 people, right? With the expense that it makes to thousands. Right. So in some ways, so for me, first off, let's get to that initial thing you just said. The term actually originally did not come. So it's most famously said by Eisenhower in his speech in 1961, in his farewell address, right? That is where it's most well known. However, the term, first off, the idea kind of floated around for a long time. The term really first was used in academic writing in 1947, right? Where it was used by the economist and diplomat Winfield W. Reifler. Right. He was writing a paper or kind of a piece in Foreign Affairs in 47. And he talks about how industrial output plays a major role in how a war goes, basically, like who will win the war or not. And he says that there is he says that there has to be a intersection between the military economy and the civilian economy for there to really be kind of a good outcome to war. And he specifically calls that the military industrial complex. Right now, the idea though, but even that kind of gives it almost too much power to this one, I guess, sort of saying, right? Because the idea again was used, but it was applied to fascism, right? So after World War II, it was really talked about a lot in Europe by a lot of philosophers and economists and stuff, where they talked about things like, the what's the word? Where they talk about the military industrial complex and its effects on kind of these fascist economies, right? In particular, Daniel Guerin in 36 in Fascism and Big Business talks about how fascist governments need to support heavy industry and have heavy industry support them as well, right? And then in particular, the creation of weaponry is a good source for this, right? Because it's something that's only usable really by the government itself. So it helps build them up while also kind of putting money back into the government in some ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it's also brought up again in 1942 in Franz Leopold Neumann's book, Behemoth, The Structure and Practice of National Socialism, where he talks about how Nazism grew in a democratic state. Right, and again, talks about this intersection between military and industry and kind of the power of the government itself as well. So that's kind of where the term. So there are these ideas floating around. Fascism really has a big impact on this idea as well. And then 47, it's really starting to be talked about in academic circles in the U.S. And then 67, Eisenhower specifically warns about it in his farewell address. So like a pretty.
Do you know if it was much of a part of like the American vernacular, or it wouldn't have been really necessarily?
It likely. I mean, it's kind of hard. It's hard to guess. Sorry, and that Eisenhower speech was in 61. There's a lot of sevens floating around. 1961, Eisenhower gave his farewell address. There's a lot of like. So it seems unlikely. Like, so in this article that we have here from James Ledbetter, he actually talks about how it's probably likely that Eisenhower or someone in his circle actually had read that article in Foreign Affairs, rather. Right. So it's likely that it kind of became part of, say, like the academic, political, military world. Right. Yeah. And it started getting put in. And so just people started saying it. It's kind of like
it's part of the discourse.
I mean, it's like any other kind of jargon. Right.
Yes.
Now, for me personally, I would say that what the military industrial complex means, it's so a lot of, first off, well, Marie, what does it mean for you? Because actually, I think my answer is going to be a lot different than yours.
Oh, I think it is the intersection between private industry and government foreign affairs interest, right? So if I think of, like, if I had to name industries that I feel are heavily engaged in sort of the military complex, like Raytheon or Halliburton, or sort of these larger publicly traded industries that have, I don't want to say insidious, because, lobbyists aren't all insidious, but have a definite reach into influencing their stock price directly with our government.
Sure.
Right. And sure. But at the same time, there's a need for it, right? It's not an unnecessary thing, but it's very hard to find sort of this balance between those two things, right? Because you can't, it's the intersection of those, of private to government, but you have to have that to be able to support your military. But what is the proper, like, where does that stop? When do you, there's, I think, a lot of intangibles that go along with that.
Sure. So
what is it to you?
Okay.
Bum, bum, bum. Mm-hmm.
To me, the military industrial complex, actually, it's not just the intersection between government and industry. It is the intersection between government, industry, and science in some ways. Because a huge amount of scientific research is funded by what would be considered like the military industrial complex.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I mean,
especially science and technology. Yes.
Yeah. So
Agreed.
like,
Totally
so some of my research we applied to like Department of Defense grants for. We didn't get them, but we applied for them.
So you
know what I
are
mean?
part of the problem.
We didn't get them. I wish we had, but we didn't get
you
them.
have public, plausible denial.
Right. It's perfect.
We didn't get them. We're not working for the government.
Gonna hide my CIA shill badge here underneath my shirt. So what
your handler is now mobilizing. They're like, go swarm,
get him,
extraction.
So the kind of, I guess, the pipeline for these ideas tends to go something like, so you're a scientist in grad school, your professor has some project you're working on and you want to apply for it. And so well, it doesn't, see, that's the thing though. It's never something as obvious as a death ray, right?
Right. Yeah,
it's like something. It's like a laser. It's like a laser guidance system, or a new computer program for geolocating stuff, or a new type of chemistry, right? Like it's never ever. No one ever gets a PhD in making a bomb.
That's
right?
what I think. That's a famous Oppenheimer quote, isn't it?
I don't know actually.
Right. No, but you never you never go into the sciences thinking, whatever I'm using is going to end up wiping out part of humanity. You think you're doing it for good. You're doing it for discovery, which is, yes, I agree with you.
Absolutely.
So it might be something as benign as like, yes, I'm trying to find a glitter replacement for whatever, like
right.
non-toxic glitter for kids.
It's something very specific, right? Like science always happens at these high levels with very specific answers to problems that you don't realize the applications for necessarily, right? Now, so what happens is, what will happen usually is then your project, whatever, you might apply for a grant to the government or whatever, and they'll say, okay, well, to apply for this, it has to have some bearing, some application to either national defense or energy or the preservation of the United States, let's say.
Yes.
Right? So you apply for the grant, and if they decide that it's you're good, your science looks good on its merits and everything, then you'll get the funding. But once you graduate, the question then becomes, well, what do you do with your research? And a lot of people will try to get work in government labs, right? Which is awesome. Like working in a government lab kicks butt based on
like Livermore labs out here,
seriously,
man.
yeah, it's amazing, right? They're super cool. They're super smart. These are the people that are gonna save the world. Right?
Or blow it up. Whatever.
Well, but you know what I mean? Like, these are the people that are
half dozen of another.
These are the people that are making the advancements of the next generation, right?
Yes.
And so, but what can happen potentially is, your project gets worked on and it's interesting and whatever, but its applications are part of a DoD grant, or, you're working with a government contractor or something else. And so it's by kind of, not insidiously again, but kind of by spreading out its influence with money and stuff that the government, the military specifically, is able to then fund fundamental science and then use that fundamental science for weaponry technology.
Yes.
Right. Now,
so has this ever happened to you? Do you feel that there's a certain point when you are, as a scientist, as an actual working scientist that knows other actual working scientists, is there a certain point in your process of discovery that you've gone through stuff and you're like, oh, holy shit, like this could be used as that, and you get freaked out? Like, I'm just wondering if there's like moments of realization that you're like, this may not be a good idea, or this actually could be applied as this.
See, but no one ever makes a discovery. So usually people don't make discoveries as kind of, what's the word? As dramatic, like as dramatic as you would in a movie, right? So it's not like,
Dude,
my
killing me. But
my experiment ran okay, and I was like, oh my god, this stuff's mutating my DNA, whatever, right? Like, but I guarantee there have been times where, say, someone will be researching, say, a cure for cancer or something, or a new type of drug, and they find out that actually this stuff is super toxic. And so it's a very useful chemical weapon or bioweapon, right?
Yes. And then the Russians show up. Yep.
Or, or even, a new type of explosive, or even, the materials that I worked with, like they're shielding, right? They are heat and radiation shielding is one of their applications. And so potentially that has military applications, right? I mean, for space travel, for even, armor, for soldiers, so there, but here's the thing though, right? In my mind, and I think this is where potentially there will be some slack maybe from, or I don't know how many people will be happy or mad about this idea, but for me personally, that's why I kind of view almost scientific work as being patriotic in a sense, because you are benefiting this country in some way. You're benefiting the world. That's kind of where you want your science to go, right? Mm-hmm. But in some ways, by doing research in the United States, you are contributing to the United States. And maybe that is in itself a kind of fetishization of the military industrial complex, where the only reason I think that it's, the only reason that we look at those people that made the atomic bombs and stuff as heroes, some people anyways, is because
they work for us.
Right. They're the only difference between a hero and a monster is whose side they're on. Right? Exactly.
Yes.
So,
agreed.
And so it's interesting, I think for a lot of people, the military industrial complex means people like Tony Stark selling weapons and stuff like that, whatever. But really, it is a much more complicated thing. I'm not trying to say that, science generally is implicated or anything, but just that the public funding of science makes this whole question a lot more muddy, or a lot more dirty than I think people want it to be.
Well,
right?
And I think especially as we, United States branches out in what they feel is warfare. I mean, cyber war, right? You can be a state actioned attack like Stuxnet or something like that. I mean, that to me has as much potential as any kind of a bomber. It's got the same, it's a different recipe, but it could be utilized in the same way, or it will be utilized in the same way. I don't know. I feel like the one thing that is always interesting to me with science, and sort of when you get into this equation of where the usage is kind of what is the ethics behind that? Because I mean, you also, I feel like, have a responsibility to that what you are ushering in is not going to be
misused.
It will probably always be misused, but it may not be like artificial intelligence, and as the most extreme example, right? I think that there is a huge potential for something like that to actually be a game ender for humanity. So what is the ethical implications of experimenting with it, bringing it into any kind of networked system, being able to understand what it does, and then what is your obligation to it as a sentient or becoming sentient and to humanity, right? So what are the ethics behind that? And I think that's, again, a very extreme example, but I think you have a responsibility to not be Frankenstein, right?
So the challenge, I think, for a lot of scientists or for a lot of people who are part of this kind of research environment, right? Because there are very, very good, very honorable, very moral scientists and engineers and stuff working for companies like Raytheon, right?
Of course.
Who are working on things that are, potentially used in weaponry or laser guidance systems or whatever, right?
Yes.
In my mind, that is actually kind of the interesting question between what is science and what is engineering, and then therefore what are the ethics of science versus what are the ethics of engineering, right? Because so for me, at least in my view, science is sort of the study of fundamental nature, and engineering is the application of science to the world for economic gain. Right? Like, so, because engineering, like, no, but really though, like, engineering.
You, sir. That was good. That was very, very good. No, I agree with you. I mean, I see where you're going with this. Yes.
Yeah. For so engineering is not about, you're not, even though I did PhD research in engineering, part of my PhD thesis was, well, how, this has to become at least close to marketable, right? This has to be used eventually. How can we use this in an industrial process to solve this problem? And how do we sell it to companies and whatever? And so science on its own, like the discovery of radioactivity or nuclear fission is not on its own right or wrong or evil or good, right? It's the application of that in order to make money in some way that can be moral or immoral, if we even want to go there. Like, there are some people who would say that morality has different meanings to different people, right? So, I mean,
agreed. It's subjective.
Someone who
subjective
is
subjective reality, yes.
Right. Someone who is a total kind of selfish. There's like an actual term for this kind of philosophy of morality, but
it's situational morale. Oh, come on! I knew this because you actually said this to me the other day. Is situational morality? It's
not. No. Like,
what is that?
So relativism kind of goes into this.
Yeah.
But the idea that someone believes that morals are only true for you yourself, and so long as you are not doing harm to you, so morals are self-interested, basically, is what this person's argument would be. And so for them, nothing you do is really, as long as it's not hurting you, nothing is really off the table, right?
Well, the name for that is just asshole.
Total butthead. So
he's just such a dillweed. That's a dillweed move.
That's a dillweed move.
But I get what you're saying, but like, I feel like those two things are more like, so science and engineering are probably very interconnected, because the engineer would not have the thought or the spark behind how they're going to apply that application without the science, right? So it's sort of like I think that I would not say it's a cop out, but I do think it's this sort of like, because they could say it the other way. They could say, well, we're only as an engineer, I'm only taking it into its logical application, right? This is logically what the science is meant to do. Like if you put, again, with fission, if you're going to split the atom and it's going to have this type of a reaction, that type of reaction is violent and destructive. That's a bomb.
True. But again, I guess the argument I think would be, you as a scientist do not necessarily know what your technology will be used for. So it becomes almost a question of like, I mean, it's almost kind of an ends justify the means thing, or not really that. It's sort of an argument of like, argument from.
That is a little bit of the Frankenstein argument, though.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you read that? Did you read that book?
I did read Frankenstein. That's one of the few I did read a couple times. Yeah, no, for sure. That is the Frankenstein argument where it's like, I didn't know it would go this way, right? I didn't know. Right,
My intention was pure. I am scientifically trying to create life, and that's it. But then that thing wakes up and looks at you, and it is now your responsibility. It's
rough stuff. So I
love the fact that Des, by the way, Des, our website maven and the only person that's keeping us pretty much afloat.
Pretty much just like fills in all of the cracks at Mad Scientist HQ.
She is the spackle that kind of keeps our little boat afloat, and she is super creative. She's an English teacher. I don't know how I didn't know this before, because I was like, oh my God, like, are you hearing these things? And I'll be like, well, it's like that time, and blah blah blah. And Cox, it's now like a running joke. You're like, nah, didn't read that one either. Nope. And it's like, are we making you cringe? And she's like, no, it's fine. I'm like, oh God, love
I know,
you.
I feel so bad. I am the student that I'm sure
English
she hates.
Teachers. I didn't really study the classics either. And I'm like, oh, Stop it.
Yeah, I know.
You're
seriously.
English teacher, man. I love that
I was looking at a list the other day, not to get too far off track. I was looking at a list the other day of the top 100 books in English on like a time list or whatever. And like half of them I had been assigned in school and I never read. I was like, I think I have soft covers of all these floating around someplace that I had to buy for the summer reading thing and I never did.
I love that. But
anyways.
look, but again, here is a good success story. No, you didn't do that stuff, but still ended up on your feet, right?
You hear that, kids? Don't do your homework.
Don't go to school. don't stay in school. Don't stay
Play
in school.
video games at home. Okay. So actually, I thought it would be kind of interesting to run through what do you think? So what do you think this conspiracy theory, this idea? So we really haven't touched on the conspiracy theories yet. We've kind of gone over the history. This idea really, it's interesting because it has sort of a twofold, depending on what side of the political spectrum you sit on, it has kind of double meanings, right?
Yes.
So, and this is kind of our it's interesting because it's sort of a litmus test almost for how you view the world and America's place in it, right? So you have on the kind of on the liberal side, let's say, or the more the liberal side, you have the idea of this great beast that it's Congress and industry and the military all working together, all shaking hands and giving each other sacks of money, selling out us, putting us in a war, forever war. And, never getting in trouble for it, always having a bad excuse for war, but always still sending us over there.
Right.
On the other side, you have, and so that's the kind of stuff that gets thrown at people like, Bush and both Bushes really, at Reagan, at all basically Republicans generally.
Yes.
And then you have the other side of it, which is the military-industrial complex is working basically to install a dictatorship in the United States. And so the idea is that, so as opposed to it being kind of a like fascist dictatorship where there's still kind of like token democracy in some way, but it's the rich that really control everything, and the rich get rich by killing other people and American citizens with forever war. On the other side, you have this idea of, they're building up the military and creating these more and more insidious, and finally the first time we can use the word insidious in this episode.
Legitimately.
These more and more insidious and kind of terrifying weaponry that will eventually be turned on the citizens.
Yes.
Right?
And I think this is if I think what we're talking about, this is my favorite, or my favorite theory. Of this whole thing. The Iron Triangle?
Yeah, the Iron Triangle. So this gets put onto people like, Obama and the Clintons and Jimmy Carter to some lesser extent, I guess.
Much lesser, but
those
yes.
peanuts, they're poisoned. Yes. But anyways, then the idea is here.
But he was only a one-termer too. See, so
that's true.
That could, just saying.
So what's interesting with this is then it also gets brought into the whole idea of UFO technology. Right. So this conspiracy goes even deeper in some people's minds to not only is the military creating these weapons so that we will be in a forever war, but actually it's not even just the U.S. military. It is the world. It is a cabal of globalists who are working in the shadows with alien weaponry and technology to subvert and control humanity eventually. So all of the wars, all of the military excursions, everything, all of the money flows through this military industrial complex that is the globalist cabal, right?
Yes.
So it's a really interesting conspiracy theory because it really is like something for everybody.
Yes. And if you're going to have a conspiracy theory, people, I'm just going to put this out there. You have to have a solid munker for it, right? You have to have a good name. And the Iron Triangle is that's something you're going to remember.
Yeah.
Just, So as you go forward, putting together your conspiracy theories, make sure, I almost wish, there was I'm going down a rabbit hole really fast. Do you remember online a while ago, there was that Wu-Tang Clan name generator?
Of course.
It's how Glover got his, got Childish Gambino. I almost feel like we need something like that for conspiracy theories, right? Like the Iron Triangle, boom, something like that.
Oh, like
maybe two or three words.
Yeah,
like you have a Wu-Tang Clan generator for that.
See, my favorite thing is for like philosophical papers on critique of like politics and society, you just throw the word modernity in as many times as you can and see if it sticks. You just see like the post-industrial
simulacrum.
Post-industrial metaphysics of the is-ought problem comments on modernity, right? Perfect. That is the name of a PhD thesis in philosophy that gets passed every single time.
That's true.
Anyways,
I like that.
So, okay, so we have this conspiracy theory that's kind of ranging all over the place and stuff.
Yes.
How true are some of those ideas?
Well, I think so.
Good
I think
answer.
you definitely. I don't think anything is as organized or as linear as Iron Triangle would have us believe. Like one hand cleanly, shakes the other.
So why don't you, for the listeners, why don't you explain kind of the Iron Triangle idea? I mean, it's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, but let's give them like a clear definition.
Basically, it's the idea that you have all of these, any point of government is working towards keeping the military complex afloat. So you have Congress. Congress is they're driving funding and political support, right? Which is driving this bureaucracy that is creating more special interest groups to push towards lower regulation and special favors. And then the special interest groups in turn provide electoral supports for Congress and presidents, right? So it's sort of like you have this again, snake that eats its own tail. I've already forgotten its name because I was so in love with the Iron Triangle. So you're going to remember that. You're going to remember that, people. The Ouroboros, right? You have this almost hermetically sealed organism that self-propagates itself.
Okay.
It's how I look at it. Like one hand shakes the other. You have congressional lobby support, and it can go in a special interest group. It can go the other way. Special interest groups will support and lobby for a certain type of bureaucracy, and those choices and execution then are executed by Congress, who then are lenient also for interest groups.
Sure. Okay. So your view kind of is that, so I would say, I think kind of, it's clear that some of that is just corruption, right?
Grift.
Yeah.
Yes.
Some of it is just grift, right? This is just graft and grifters and whatever.
Some of it is just swamp drainage.
Yeah. And that's definitely a big issue in politics, right? I would say.
Absolutely.
So some of that does obviously happen. But I think it's the idea that there is a oversight, like power, controlling all of that kind of movement around. That is the area where it gets into deeper, darker conspiracy, right?
Yes.
And that's the beauty of this, is that there is a kernel of truth here, right? In some sense. So
yeah, I don't know. I look at Dick Cheney and I'm like, I'm kind of buying in, right? You see Dick Cheney.
Could be a lizard.
But I mean, seriously, if you do think about and this is as far as I'll go with seriously considering a conspiracy theory is, with the sort of validation, but you have someone who has some deep trenches to Halliburton and to sort of privatizing war in some ways, which is also another part of it, as vice president. And as vice president, again, not directly making the decisions, but being heavily influential into a war that is, again, has a faulty groundwork for proof as to why we went into it. So even if that has a lot of flaws, I think that type of mixture is perfect for this type of conspiracy. Because I mean,
Sure.
I look at that as a rational person. I'm like, oh, hells yeah. And he's a lizard person, man.
And he's a damn lizard person.
Such a lizard person.
If we look at
he shot someone in the face, man.
He did shoot someone and get away with it.
That is
so
so
so here's the thing,
okay.
right? If you look at US military outlays, adjusted for inflation in billions of dollars, right? Since World War II, the highest they have been adjusted for inflation since World War II is at World War II, right? So at 1945, it was kind of the highest it was at just a squeak above 900 billion.
So what is this accounting for? Wait.
This is military. So this is military spending.
Okay.
So it was like 900 billion in 1945.
Yes.
It then dropped off back down to like 100 billion right after World War II. And that makes sense, right?
Which, yeah.
And now remember, too, the United States, when it was first founded, did not have a standing military, right? We didn't have defense spending at the level that we have it today because we did not have a standing army.
We didn't have a central treasury.
No, well, that too, but...
Right, we didn't have a way to pay for it, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
like we didn't have a military until... I don't think we had a military until after World War I, right? The idea of a military that we have today in any sense, right? Now...
Yeah, thereabouts, yeah.
So after World War II, we had this post-war period where spending went down. And then within 10 years, it had spiked back up to averaging between 500 and 400 billion, basically until the modern day.
But I think it's interesting to also point out for that military spending, it is 9 times more, at least, than anyone else, right? I mean, basically,
it's
we're like half,
more. So
we're half the pie.
Yeah, no. So we're going to get into that, right? So, but the interesting thing here is that so after war, so even after the Korean War, the Vietnam War, there were, again, these kind of relaxations in military spending, but the degree of the relaxation was significantly different than it was after World War II, right? And so in some ways, it's like, well, maybe it's because of just the scale of World War II and, the whatever, but, really, it's gotten
what did
quite
they
high.
introduce? What did they introduce in World War II that was totally different from any other warfare? The bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. The bomb.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like that to me is like, that's the game changer.
That's true.
Military
That's a very, very good point. It's a very good point.
Right.
But so for me though, what's interesting is that the drop off between actual war, like in the Cold War, it sort of makes sense, right? We were still having this arms race with Russia, whatever. But actually, we are spending more today than we did throughout any point in the Cold War. We're inching closer to we're at around 600 billion now. So we're inching closer to that World War II value, right? So right now the United States, this is from 2015, spends $598.5 billion a year on the military. That's 54% of all of our discretionary spending. Okay. Now let's look at that based on some other numbers. Education is 6%. Medicare and health, 6%. Veterans benefits, 6%.
Which is painful. That's so, yeah.
Science, 3%. Social Security, unemployment and labor, 3%. Food and agriculture, 1%. So this, and that's not all of them, honestly.
Infrastructure is like 0.5.
Oh yeah, the infrastructure is not even big enough to be on the list.
No,
right?
It's so sad.
So, so that's significant. So we are spending 54% on building up the military, but only 6% on helping the people negatively affected by their service to this country.
Yes.
Right.
The debt we owe, we can't. Yeah. We're not repaying. Yeah.
Now, some other numbers here, just to give kind of a scope of this. The United States defense spending is, like I said, around $600 billion. China's is hovering around 150. They're the next highest. Then Russia at around 70 to 80. Then the UK at about 50 billion. France, Japan, and Germany about the same level. So we are, 5 to 6 times greater than the next country that spends the most on military.
Yes.
And based on the average of other civilized nations, kind of civilized is the wrong word, like based on other nations that have the need for a standing military. And even that is kind of a point that can be argued, I think. We spend a comically huge amount of money.
We do. And just also thinking about what we've already spent on that's in surplus, right? So we have a huge cachet of weaponry.
Sure.
But may or may not becoming dated, but a lot of it where the public is not even aware of. But I would also say, like, post World War II, maybe what you're seeing are now that's reflective of World War II since the Cold War is the diversification of who we consider our enemy to be, right? Cold War, it's like, if you're going after Cold War, it's very specific. It's a very specific place. They've got a specific climate. You're going to be able to attack in X ways. But now when you're looking at a more globalized, right, a more globalized enemy that could be anywhere, that could be in the United States even, then I would assume that your spending would become so much more because you're trying to cover so much more of a defensive proposition.
Now, here is the interesting part, though, Marie. This is from a Salon article called "America Arms Dealer to the World." Okay.
Oh, there goes that argument. Yeah.
So,
Salon.
From 2006 to 2010, this is a quote from this article. The U.S. accounted for nearly 1/3 of the world's arms exports, easily surpassing a resurgent Russia in the Lords of War race. Despite a decline in global arms sales in 2010 due to recessionary pressures, the U.S. increased its market share, accounting for a whopping 53% of the trade that year. Last year, the U.S. saw the U.S. on pace to deliver more than $46 billion in foreign arms sales. Who says America isn't number one anymore?
So is that, and that's the government selling them, not?
I want to continue this.
Right?
No,
Okay,
this is the government and industry.
And okay.
I believe industry can only sell them through the military, though. Or through the government. For a shopping list of our arms trades, try searching the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute database for arms exports and imports. It reveals that in 2010, the U.S. exported major conventional weapons to 62 countries, from Afghanistan to Yemen, and weapons platforms ranging from F-15, F-16, and F-18 combat jets to M1 Abrams main battle tanks to Cobra attack helicopters sent to our Pakistani comrades, to guided missiles in all flavors, colors, and sizes.
Well, at least we're egalitarian in that respect.
The Obama administration tried to sell $11 billion in arms to Iraq, including Abrams tanks, F-16 fighter bombers, $30 billion in F-15 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, and that was completely not opposed by Congress. So the challenge is that we are selling the weapons that are being used to fight us.
Yes, we are. And the most interesting, but even the more frightening thing too is it's like, okay, so we're selling them because we need or we would like more money, and also because they're becoming dated. So the stuff that we have coming up that we've got cooking is probably even more frightening than anything that we're selling.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Which is even more terrifying.
So in some ways, then there's I would say almost a bit. So I don't.
Damn it, dude! I was about ready to write this whole thing off as just.
I don't want to call this one. I don't want to call this one true because it's not true, right?
Well,
because here's the thing: there is no international cabal at the top of all of this, right? There is no directed energy in my mind to selling this stuff. And the thing is too, if we're selling, if the plan is forever war, then selling arms to both sides is a pretty damn good way to do it. But I wonder how much of that actually includes sort of, say, the, I don't know how much of it includes kind of, I guess, the government, or how much of it includes other countries. Like, it's an interesting argument. And in my mind, it is, maybe this is just, again, kind of our political biases, but in my mind, this is much more about individual corruption breeding a larger story of corruption or a larger swamp, let's call it, right, in the politics of America, as opposed to, say, a large conspiracy involving, you know, the subjugation of American citizens. I think it's people being shitty, making money off of being shitty to their fellow man. I don't know. I don't think it's like,
yeah.
I even Dick Cheney and stuff, like, I have a hard time. Like, he is a bad person, it would appear.
I don't know, man. Yeah, he's
based on his actions and stuff.
That's pretty tough. Cheney's pretty.
At the same time, like, do I think that there is a kind of, I guess, larger conspiracy role there? I'm very doubtful.
No, I think it is more opportunist. It's more like my enemy's enemy is my friend, right? Until they're back to being my enemy. So we are going to fund and funnel weaponry into places to help subsidize factions that fight against the enemy that we feel is the more, you know, is the worser of the two evils.
Sure.
Until that well-funded group that we thought were going to be our friends turns out to not care for us as much and uses the weapons against us, which
not to be so friendly
a lot. Which, you know, again, it's like that's but we're not the only ones selling weaponry either. I mean, it's like weaponry is being sold by Russia, it's being sold by China, but I mean, we definitely are the largest, to the point that you just, you know, talked about with the pie, where we are the largest ones doing it. It's just, it's so insidious. And the thing too is, it's like, even if you just like strip out, like, let's strip out any kind of weaponry that's not nuclear, right? Or nuclear. Then just to be safe. I mean, think about how much of that we still have, that we have not retired, that we are not, even when we stepped back from it, we still have enough to, like, blow up the world, like some ridiculous number over and over again.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
It's like that stuff's just, you know, hanging out in Idaho or something.
So actually, one of the things that I thought is really interesting that is brought up a lot with these discussions about, say, like national security and also weapons and stuff is kind of, I guess, where the developments in weapons come from, or almost as well. Like, so North Korea has been trying to make a nuclear weapon for decades. Right?
Yes.
What the hell has taken them so long? Like, what is that process like? And obviously we can't get into it super detailed, right?
No, but they got much better at much faster over a very short amount of time.
They did
recently, which is, you know, which is pretty interesting.
It is very interesting. Now, and actually there's reports today that the reason that they said that they were going to suspend testing for a while was actually them saving face, because this last big earthquake actually completely destroyed their research facility.
Really?
Yeah, that was actually reported today. I saw it all over, you know, I saw it all over Reddit on our news and stuff, but so who knows? I mean, maybe,
if I was a good conspiracy theorist, I would say that was no earthquake.
Oh my goodness. Well, actually that kind of gets into what I think our next episode should be on, which is like super weapons. Right?
Super weapons and
where we think these things come
cyber
from.
Weapons, like the Olympic Games, which is one of my Stuxnet, which is my absolute favorite topic.
Totally. Now, one cyber weapon that actually, Marie, you're doing a deep dive on is sonic weapons.
Is the sonic weapon? Yes,
the sonic weapon. So that'll be on Marie's new podcast. Whatever remains.
And it's so the cool. Sonic attack that supposedly happened recently in Havana, Cuba.
Yeah.
And was it truly a sonic attack?
It's pretty cool. It's a cool story, for sure.
It's a cool story, and it will be kind of interesting to dig into it. And I will be, of course, tapping my local scientists for hypotheticals, not to be taken into an engineering. We will not be taking this into any kind of engineering actuality. So everyone just breathe deep that we will not be having any kind of sonic weaponry.
So let's to close out this episode, let's talk about nuclear proliferation. What is the challenge?
Can I just suggest one other thing though?
Go ahead.
We should talk about that haunted painting, dude.
We should. Okay,
with that.
We'll get to that at the very end.
Oh my God! All right.
Okay.
We're gonna close. Yeah, we're gonna close with a nice light topic. Go get yourself
nuclear proliferation and then haunted paintings.
Yeah, some sparkling bubble water, and we'll talk about a little nuclear proliferation.
Okay. So what? Okay. So what do you think, Marie, is the stopgap in making an atomic weapon.
What do you mean by stop? Like, how do we pull back and how do we
Like,
get rid of them?
why can't North Korea do it?
North Korea can't do it because they can't get enough plutonium to enrich, would be my guess. They can't enrich it, and the process of enriching it takes a certain amount of energy and time that they don't have the wherewithal for.
Okay. Actually, the reason North Korea doesn't have a nuclear bomb yet, they have the material. They have the ability to centrifuge, fizzle nuclear weaponry stuff. The challenge is the creation of a guidance system that allows it to be put onto an intercontinental ballistic missile.
Really? They can't get the drone.
It's literally the difficulty in aiming and creating a computer program, like a sensor array and stuff on the weapon that can allow it to actually hit land from far enough away.
And we know that for certain. That's a fact.
Well, I mean, we know that all of their missiles miss their targets.
Oh, yes.
and sometimes never get off the landing pad and stuff, right? So that's, I mean, this is supposition on my part in some ways, but based on all the reports that I've seen, it is their inability to get it onto a intercontinental ballistic missile or ICBM. Right?
Interesting.
Now, in terms of like, so you often hear about centrifuges and nuclear centrifuges and stuff, right? You'll hear about that on the news. What that is it's literally the method to basically separate out the radioactive isotope that you want from the non-radioactive one.
It's a big spinning device.
But
it's super fast.
But the chemistry to get from like a uranium ore to a usable final product in a weapon is a closely guarded secret, right?
Yes.
You can imagine, right?
Yeah, you don't want that,
On top of that,
7-Eleven doing that shit.
Right. On top of that, the detonation mechanism is also evidently a super difficult kind of like deeply guarded secret, right? But the thing is, like, that's the thing though. We never think about these mechanics of, say, weaponry in that sense of those are all, again, tying it back to the beginning, those are all small scientific problems or engineering problems that were probably solved by a student and a professor someplace, right? Doing some other kind of work.
Well-meaning
right?
MIT grads, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the same kind of technology that can be used to pick a pixel on an image or something can be used to pick a spot on the ground if the image that they're analyzing is a GPS radar overlay, right?
Yes.
Like, these are small advancements that end up making, the difference between, a dirty bomb, which for those that don't know what a dirty bomb is, basically, it's just a conventional weapon with radioactive material within it. So basically it just causes
poisons the hell out of everything.
Yeah, it basically poisons the environment with radiation, right? So there's that issue, but then there's also the issue of these. So it makes a difference between a dirty bomb, which can hurt a lot of people, but is kind of more of a long-term thing, versus an atomic weapon, which is like a instantaneous devastation. Yes,
which will take out everything in X amount of radius. Yes,
absolutely. So it's really it's fascinating, some of these ideas. So,
and we're not doing any of that. That's the other thing that we need to make sure that our listening public knows. Chris and I are not doing that.
No,
we don't have any ideas about that. We don't have anything in any garages or anything. So
no,
rest assured.
I don't even have a garage.
No, I do, but it's got some haunted painting in it, so I don't want to be giving that thing nukes.
Of course not. Okay, let's talk about this haunted painting, Marie.
Dude, well, I think we have to acknowledge that, like, I know I freaked out a little bit about this the last time, but that was before I had seen said painting that you had freaked out about. From your childhood.
Okay, it is hilarious to me that. Okay, everyone that I told this story to thought I was being facetious. I was making it up when I said it is the painting, right? Well, everyone thought I was kidding, or like I misremembered or whatever. Even Katie was like, "That's not the same painting." And then my mom sends me the text, and I forward it over to you, and you're like,
Dora,
freaking out on Twitter. It is the exact. It's not the exact same painting. It's the same scene for sure.
It is just a wider perspective.
Yeah,
mine is
right.
like if you took, so Chris is sort of a longer triangle, or sorry, longer rectangle. Mine is a closer crop of his scene, but it's the same scene, and that's what is so crazy about it. So we did do some due diligence and some research after I freaked out, and I apologize to Chris that I didn't believe him adequately enough when he.
I know what I saw. I know what I saw.
I was like, whatever, mate. I was like, how is that? But so these paintings, and it's signed by G. Whitman, and G. Whitman is, again, sort of this catch-all name that was used in what is called like art mills, and so you would have people going in and basically, you know, with any kind of aptitude for painting, going in and painting over and over and over and just signing this one person's name. And they would be sold in airports, and they'd be sold in sort of like strip malls, and, you know, interior designers use them sometimes. And they were especially prevalent, I would say, like late 70s and 80s.
That's so weird.
Sweet spot, right? Now, what's weird is, so the artist that we have, which is Whitman, tops, like during that time frame, they think maybe between 8,000 and 10,000 paintings were generated with this person's name. However, the majority of these paintings were not that color scheme. They were of, I want to say, like mountains and like pretty snows, or it would be springtime and there would be a cabin. And it was a less sort of expressionistic look and feel. And if you Google images by G. Whitman, you'll see that there's the huge majority of them are sort of these benign looking platitudes that are awful. And a lot of them too are prints. So they moved from oil to prints. However, what we both have, which is even what trips me out more and which really tripped out Scott and Forrest, is that they're oil paintings. That's an oil painting. That's done by hand, right? That's done by hand. And it is a scene and a color that is not as prevalent as, and I don't have the stats because, you know, I just don't have them, but they weren't as popular or as seemingly highly sold as the rest of his oeuvre of crap.
I mean, I don't know if it's crap. It's like a good painting.
Well, it is a painting. I'm going to give you that. It is an oil painting.
If I could paint like that, I would be so happy.
It's not bad painting, but I mean, I would say it's, the weird thing is, like, and again, the thing that trips me out is that so we decided, hey, for haunted paintings, we're going to do this, and I'll go find a painting, and we'll kind of kitsch it up a little bit, and then we'll auction it, or we won't auction, we'll raffle it off to our Patreon members, which I still think is a very cool idea, and I'm really excited to do it. So I went in looking for a painting, right? So I went into a store that I've never been into before, that I was driving by, and I was like, oh, I bet, it's a thrift store, and it's sort of the tchotchke thrift store, so I bet they've got some crappy painting that's not too much money, but we can, spooky it up a little bit. And I walk in, and like, I'm looking around, and that's the painting I want. I was like, that's it. That's the painting right there. It's perfect price range, small enough. It's a little off-putting as is. And again, like this is at least 2 decades later, a completely different, not polar opposite, but the opposite side of the country. And I found the exact same painting that scared you as a kid.
It's really weird.
That's some weird shit.
It's really weird.
That's some weird shit. And I mean, again, it's like, I don't know enough about it to go for stats on what the stats on that would be, if like that would be more likely to happen than not. But it's like, it would be different if I was buying it new, right? Yeah. Or if I was looking for a print, and I would be like, oh, we both found the same print of, Alf from the 80s or some shit like that. But we found it's an oil painting that was done. Yeah. So it's still in my garage because I'm not touching it. So Patreon members, some lucky stiff out there is gonna get the painting. And I've, again, added some embellishment to it just to make it just a tiny bit more spooky, which actually may make it less spooky knowing what we know now about this.
I know, seriously. I was thinking about that because like the thing is too, I didn't know right away if it was when you said that it was the painting and you sent it to me. I started freaking out and I was like, oh my God, it's the same painting. But I wasn't 100% certain, right? Until my mom sent the text back. Like the next day.
Well, so where did she find you gotta ask Dor where she found this stuff, man? Where did that thing come from?
It's not my mom. It's not my mom's painting. It's my uncle and aunt's painting.
But she must know. She could ask, no?
According to my mom, unless I'm thinking of a different painting. So we actually have a painting. I think I'm getting this mixed up. We have a painting in my mom's house that is really cool. And it's like this, like shellacked on. It's like painted with, a trough. I guess. You're right. It's painted.
No,
it's painted.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's
palette.
not.
It's a
palette.
palette.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's not like a painting. Like it's not like a painting, a traditional style painting or anything. It's like blobs of paint stuck onto this thing to make like a really like brutally expressionist picture of something. Right. And so I think she has 2 of them. I want to say, I'm not sure, but she bought those from some guy in like Central Park or something. Like she bought them, like he was painting them and she bought them.
Okay. That's not these.
But that's not the same painting.
No.
I don't know where my, oh my God, this isn't even the only scary painting. This isn't even the only scary painting we have. My mom was funny. She was like, I was really glad you didn't say this other story about this other painting she did. My mom still is a artistically inclined. And my mom has done some, I think very beautiful paintings.
So it's my mom. My mom was a painter too.
Oh yeah.
Dude.
Shit's
getting weird.
It's so weird. It's so weird. So one of the paintings though that my mom has is this. She did it in like, I think she did in like high school or something, but it's this really scary portrait of herself as like a kid. And it looks like a black-eyed kid almost, the painting that she did of herself. It's like she brought it home. And I was like, "Oh my God, this is so scary."
Dude, we're going to have to take pictures of our mom's art and put it up.
Seriously, we're going to have to.
My mom she is and was a really good artist. And
sure.
It's like, she's done some kind of spooky ass shit too, where you're like, oh, seriously, what's up with the, But I hope she takes a picture of the back of it, because then we could actually find the year too and where it was sold. Because that's
oh, really? Okay. Yeah, no, she can totally do that. I mean, she's at my uncle's house like every other weekend.
And find out where they bought it.
She basically has a bedroom there at this point. Yeah, that's super interesting.
And then maybe just burn it. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out.
Well, what is weird is the one that they have is definitely oil. It's definitely on canvas.
Yeah.
I feel like they have another. I can't remember if this is me just like misremembering or not. I feel like they have a very similar one done in like the same style, but it's like of a different scene. And if what you're saying, I mean, you're like, if it is like a mass produced kind of painting or whatever, I mean, this is in my mind similar to like, you go into like a Bed Bath & Beyond and you see a cool painting that's like painted there. You buy it for like $100, and you know what I mean. Like it is possible that a lot of these were made, but even if in total they did 10,000,
total painting.
That's not that many.
That's not that. That's the other thing too. Is think about the time, because with Bed Bath & Beyond, they wouldn't be doing an oil. They would be doing a printing process that looks like oil paint, right? They wouldn't be actually painting. These paintings were actually physically painted, I think, because it's from the 1970s, even the 80s. They didn't have printing technology that would replicate the look of paint.
So I'm just looking at it right now.
Yeah.
Right. If it was 10,000 paintings, and let's say there's 7 million people in the United States, that's like a 0.14% chance.
Dude, it's just astronomical.
That, I mean, not chance necessarily, but so 10,000 out of 7 million is 0.14%.
It's just crazy ass odds.
Nuts. It's
so and it's weird. Less than that, because that's all of the paintings that this that were signed with Whitman, that were signed by this particular quote unquote artist.
It's so weird. All right. Anyways,
I'm now, great. So, hey, beloved listener and Patreon members, if you would like a chance to own said piece of art, by all means, we're going to be doing, when should we do this, Raphael? We should, because we got to get rid of this thing, because I'm now, like, the more and more we talk about it, and the more and more I'll get texts from, like, people that are like, so tell me the story, but I'm like, I don't want to talk about the GTN painting anymore.
Don't talk about the painting anymore. Let's say another 2 weeks.
Yes.
So we'll get 2 more episodes, then we'll do the raffle, and we'll announce the winner on the episode, so 3 episodes from now. All right? So if you would like to enter the raffle, it's $1 on Patreon to enter. And you can sign up and then quit immediately. That's totally cool with us. And we will enter you in for the raffle.
I'm about ready to just pay people to take it away.
I know, right? So actually, speaking of Patreon, we got a bunch of patrons this week to say thank you to.
Sweet.
We got Molly Townsend. Thank you so much.
They all want the painting.
Telling you, man. Chris McClay.
Spooky. Thank you, Chris.
You so
Thank you, Molly.
much. We got Jill Cuzza. Thank you so much. I hope I'm saying that right. Cozza. I hope I'm saying that right. And then I think so, yeah.
Okay.
She's super cool. All these people are cool. I've reached out and talked to all of them. They are super awesome. Molly is a scientist right now. Chris reached out with a really cool photo. Jill has just been super supportive on Twitter generally. Jeremy Todd Sturgill, totally kick-ass artist. He's the guy that drew the photo or drew the picture of me fighting the giant squid. He is awesome. We love his art for sure.
Woo!
Yes,
we love artists.
We sure do.
Love these. Like when people are sending this stuff, it's just like I get such a kick out of it.
And actually, speaking of that, we have another artist that actually reached out to us on Instagram, who sent some awesome stuff. Brett Manning. So it's Brett Manning art. I'll shoot a link over on the Instagram so people can follow it or whatever. She does some really cool drawings and prints and stuff and like stickers of cryptids and fairies and spooky monsters and just like it's so cool. Go check it out. She sent over some cool stuff. So we're sending her back a whole bunch of cool stuff as well.
Awesome.
So that's it. So thank you so much for supporting the show on Patreon.
I have one more really good one. So reach out on Facebook from a Robert Deemy, who came up with the funniest saying, tweeting my joy of Team Giant Squid Facebook friends, mollusks, cephalopods, cuttlefish. They're friends of the pod. Get it? Cephalopods?
Oh, that's so cool. We should call them cephalopods. Hell yeah, we should call them cephalopods.
Because we're basically ripping off, Crooked Media. But whatever.
That's fine, whatever.
Fine.
Listen, it's only ripping off until they sign us.
Friends of the pod. Love that. So, yes, thank you so much. We love hearing from you.
We love it. All right. Have a good night.
Night.
Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.